Welcome back to our course on Excel 2016. Now, before we actually get started on making an Excel workbook, I want to talk very briefly about the use of a touch device. Now, those of you who intend to follow this course using a touch device, either all of the time or some of the time, need to know one or two very important things before we really get started. And that's what I'm going to cover in this section. Now, before I go any further, I should point out we are dealing with the full desktop Excel 2016 application. There is a specific cut down version of Excel designed for use with touch devices with small screens such as phones and small tablets. That's not the version of Excel that we're using here. We're using the full desktop application, but you can use it with touch. Now, as I'm going to show you in the next section, if I wanted to create a new workbook, I would click on one of these templates. In this case, I'm going to click on that blank workbook template there, and it's going to create a new empty workbook. Up on the top left-hand corner of the screen, there's something called the Quick Access Toolbar. And one of the commands that you should see on this toolbar is this little picture with a little finger pointing at a button. And if I click on the little arrow to the right of it, it lets me switch between the two modes of using Excel. Mouse mode, which is the mode I'm going to be using almost all the time, and touch mode. Now, what touch mode does, as it tells you there, is that it gives you more space between commands, and then Excel is optimized for use with a touch device. If you're going to use a touch device and follow the course with a touch device, mostly it will be absolutely fine, but I do suggest that the very first thing you do once we start up Excel and start creating workbooks is to switch to touch mode. Now, look what happens to this ribbon along the top of the screen here when I switch to touch mode. Look at all those commands. Everything is spaced out more. In fact, the commands that you can see seem to dramatically change. They perhaps haven't changed quite as much as you think they have, but they're definitely more spaced out. And the reason they're more spaced out is it enables you to operate Excel with your fingertips. Having that extra bit of spacing makes it much easier to target the particular commands that you're trying to use. Now, there are some other differences as well when you employ touch mode. For instance, these little rectangles within the main window here called the cells of the workbook, if I click on one of them with the mouse, which is what I'm going to do here, you see the cross cursor there. If I click, that cell is selected. You notice the little rectangle with it. Now let me select a different cell, but this time I'm going to use my fingertip. I get a different selection marker there. I get that rectangle, but with the two little circles, one on each corner. So that gives me a completely different selection shape. In addition, let me select a different cell again, but this time instead of just tapping with my fingertip, I'm going to tap and hold. Watch what happens. I get a bigger square if I hold for long enough. Now when I release my finger, I not only have that cell selected, but I have what's called a mini toolbar, a set of the tools that I'm most likely to use having selected a cell. And on that mini toolbar, the right hand end, I have a little drop down arrow, and if I tap on the drop down arrow, I get what's called a contextual menu. Now, these are features associated with using touch in Excel 2016. There are more of them, and I'll talk about more of them later on. But I do suggest that if you are going to use a touch device, as soon as we get started, switch to touch mode, and you will see some different behavior in terms of things like the shape and size of that mini toolbar, how selections look, and so on. But generally speaking, you'll be able to follow the course fine, but some things, as you've seen here, will look just a little bit different. Having said that, if you have a straightforward choice between touch and mouse and keyboard, I do suggest you use mouse and keyboard because it's much easier to be accurate, and that's the approach that I'm going to be using almost all of the time. And one final point is that with the release of Excel 2013, not 2016, there was a blog post on office.com explaining in quite a bit of detail how touch can be used very effectively with Office, including Excel. And I still think that's a very good source of information if you want to find out more about how to use Touch with Excel. It started out with 2013, but it applies equally to Excel 2016. So if you want to find out more about that, that's a very good place to look. I haven't seen an equivalent post for Excel 2016 at the time of recording this course. Of course, somebody at Microsoft may bring one out. And of course, there are various other independent posts by people about how to use Touch with Microsoft Office software. That's the end of this section. Please join me in the next one.